because I stopped.
Okay.
So have a good time, and you're responsible of letting people in through the waiting room, right?
Yes.
Perfect.
Thank you, Paul. And is it possible for us to have our organization beside our names and then two as Mies proposed? Just before we let people in.
I think it helps if you have the numbers in front, because then the whoever is doing the allocating has a much easier job.
True. Name yourself.
Vivian, maybe it helps. Maybe it's only for me, but sometimes your sound cuts out for me, as if your microphone moves away from your mouth or something.
Yes, so because I have two laptops with me, yeah, I'm trying to record, so that's that might be the reason. But can you hear me now? Yes, hopefully I won't need to speak, given that Peter's helping out with the facilitation. All right, so I will start letting everyone in if we don't have any more questions. Okay.
Thanks, Vivian. It's great.
Interpreters, please, can you interpret in French? Let me make sure I can pick it up here. Thank you. Alrighty, Peter.
Okay. I'm not sure if there's all of us that are going to be here on the call, but welcome to you all and thanks for joining today. I'm Pete Ritchie from Nourish Scotland, and I'm moderating this webinar, which is part of the D&C Days for 2021. And we're looking at governance for climate action in the food system. We're looking at NDCs and local dialogues. And this is part of our theme to look at resilient agriculture and food systems. So what we're trying to get at in this session is this issue of governance and why it's important, how you can go about it. The food system delivers an awful lot of stuff, but it actually delivers really poor outcomes for the planet and for a lot of people. And the question is, who's in charge? You know, who influences what happens in the food system, and how do we do that? So that's what this session is focused on. It looks like we're going to have a small but perfectly formed group of people to talk about it. And the good thing about that is we can get into in a bit more depth than we might have been able to otherwise. So that's certainly not a problem to that. So just in terms of housekeeping, you know, this is a public event. It's going to be recorded. And if everybody can just put in the chat box who they are and where they're from, and that's a useful thing for people to pick up on, make contact with other people. And it'd be great to have people's cameras on if possible. There is interpretation in Spanish and French. You can see at the bottom of your screen if you want to click on that. That would be helpful. So that's me. The session has got sort of two bits to it. We're looking at the national level of food system governance, and to some extent, because this is the climate COP, we're looking at that through the lens of the nationally determined contributions, which are obviously all part of the Paris Agreement. Some countries obviously have national food plans, and some regions have national food plans, and some cities have their local food plans, which are not necessarily plugged into the NDCs. And of course, that is one of the governance issues. You know, where do you hang your food plan onto? And is the NDCs the right place to hang it onto? But however people construct their NDCs and however they construct their national food plans, the real question is, who is involved in that? Who is at the table? Who decided what we're going to do as a country, as a region, as a city in terms of our food system? And is that right? You know, have we got the right people in the room? Have we got the right processes and structures for decision making? And as you all know, we've just been through the experience of the UN Food Systems Summit, which, if you like, was a classic example of different views about who should be in the room, who should be at the table, what should be the agenda, what are we talking about, what are the core issues. So food's a contentious issue. So we're going to start off today with hearing about a study that Hasib Bakri from Climate Focus has been doing, looking at the NDCs, looking at a number of countries in some depth to try to understand, so in relation to their NDCs, who is involved in that process, and you know, how well did they do in terms of engaging the people who need to be at that table in that conversation. So without further ado, I'm going to hand over to Hasib to introduce the work he's been doing. Hasib.
Thanks, Pete, and thanks everyone for joining. Thank you, Vivian, for sharing the slides. Could you go to the next slide, please? Yes, over the past few months, we have been looking at assessing how countries are integrating a food systems thinking and approach in developing, setting measures, targets, and implementing those climate measures and targets through their nationally determined contributions under the Paris Agreement. I will be sharing some of our results from the perspective of governance and how that is integrated in the nationally determined contributions. As Pete rightly pointed out, it's now clear that food system transformation has to be at the heart of climate action in order to deliver on the interconnected goals of food security, resilience of livelihoods, and to protect human and planetary health. Food and climate issues are therefore closely linked and requires action across policy priorities, research, investment, and practices on the ground in relation to different components of food systems. Taking a food systems approach to climate action also results in a diversity of context-specific solutions for food production, for how food is distributed, and for food consumption and reducing food loss and waste. This means, from a governance perspective, engaging the various actors who are involved in different stages of the food value chains, such as farmers, fishers, traditional and indigenous communities, food advocates, private sector companies, consumers, and of course, policymakers. And this is to maximize co-benefits and minimize trade-offs among different policy interventions. Next slide, please. But how well our country is doing with food systems and food systems thinking in relation to their climate goals and measures under their NDCs. To answer this, we developed an assessment framework as a tool for policymakers and food advocates to identify opportunities for better integration of food systems within the NDCs. We are applying this framework to the NDCs of 14 countries, which you see on this map. And from these 14 countries, we have assessed 8 countries already. We selected these 14 countries in the geographical and economic balance, so that they represent different regions in the world, as well as the mitigation potential and adaptation needs and food security concerns within these countries, and the various climate negotiating blocks that they represent. The analysis was based mostly on the NDC document submitted under the Paris Agreement, but it also considered and considers broader climate and food system policies at the national level. Each assessment is complemented by interviews with 5 to 10 in-country policymakers, advocates, sectoral experts from health, climate, agriculture, and different other sectors. This is to understand the challenges, ambitions, and needs for food system transformation from different perspectives in each country. Next slide, please. We are planning to launch the full results of our assessment next year, early next year, February, March, but I can share some of our insights in relation to governance and just transitions within food systems and climate goals and policies. From the 8 countries that we have assessed, we found that first, the majority of countries we assess do not provide detailed information about their NDC's development process, making it difficult to assess the extent to which this process was inclusive and participatory, including all stakeholders in the process. But through our interviews, we found that while the development of these NDCs involved some degree of public participation, key food system stakeholders and particularly marginalized communities were not frequently consulted in developing the NDC and setting those measures and targets. This leads, of course, to a knowledge and evidence gap and compounds the structural inequalities and inequities that already exist in the climate and food system policy processes. Secondly, NDCs are generally developed by specific ministries, and the development and implementation of only a few NDCs that we assess meaningfully involve different ministries, regional governments, and local public officials. There was also limited engagement with non-governmental stakeholders, such as the private sector actors, smallholder farmers, women, local communities, indigenous peoples, and broader civil society actors. This type of coordination, although, is not only crucial for policy coherence and their implementation, but also for building broader support for climate action and ensuring a successful implementation of measures set out in the text of the NDC. Thirdly, we found that the quantification of implementation costs is also often lacking. NDCs do not provide quantitative implementation costs for different measures set out in the NDC, but this is necessary in order to direct public finance towards ecologically beneficial forms of farming, towards healthy food, and towards building resilient livelihoods. it is also necessary to unlock private, philanthropic, and multilateral funding to implement NDC and NDC targets. And fourthly, the importance of green jobs are not generally emphasized in the NDCs. While some NDCs like the US, the UK, and Colombia emphasize the importance of green jobs, they are not typically linked to the food systems within these countries. Next slide, please. These were some of the findings, but of course there are more detailed findings that you can find in the link on this slide. We'll be launching the final results of our assessments early next year. Thank you, and we'll be looking forward to discussion in the later sessions.
Thanks very much, Hasib. And at this stage of the process, what we want to do is, if you've got any thoughts about that link to your experience, either where you live or where you work, in terms of good or bad examples of the things that Hasib was talking about in terms of engaging stakeholders, then do put them in the chat, and we can come back to some of those later. And we're going to hear from Hasib again on the panel in a little while. So I don't know if it's been a busy sort of few days for most people, I guess, but I was listening into a conversation this morning in the WWF pavilion, and Lawrence Haddad from GAIN was talking there. And I don't know if this might be something you would have a particular view on from Nairobi, but he was talking about this whole business about dialogues. And he was saying, well, it's all very well having national dialogues, but he said, for example, in Kenya, it's the counties where most of the action really happens in terms of some of these conversations about food systems. And so I think what we try to do in this next session is to bring together 4 people working in different parts of the world on that sort of much more local engagement, local dialogues around food systems and climate change. So it's my great pleasure to introduce 4 speakers. And first up, we've got Elujalo Opiemi, who is with Youth Environment Nigeria, who's been working on the Folk to Farm dialogues in Southwest Nigeria. So Elujalo, over to you.
Thank you, Pete. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to everyone, depending on where you're joining us from. I'm happy to be here. So like Pete earlier mentioned, my organization, like a number of other organizations across the world, believes that agriculture is potentially able to address the challenges of climate change, food security issues, and then addressing the current rural poverty. And one thing we believe that to make this happen, a platform that allows for collaborative engagement between farmers and local government representatives is largely essential to making this happen. And this is what we've been working on for about a year now, as part of the wider Global Folk to Farm Dialogue, earlier mentioned by Pete, as chaired by Nourish Scotland. And prior to starting this project, what we realized was that the voices of farmers has not really been captured in relevant food-related policies and decision-making space. And this has largely contributed to misalignments in priorities and also distrust among farmers, because these voices has not largely been heard, and where it is assumed heard, these promises has not also been delivered on, and this has strengthened the level of mistrust between government and then the farmer representatives. And of course, we know that in order to achieve this just transition, this needs to change, because these stakeholders need to come together and explore the opportunities and challenges available to just transition in food and farming, starting from the local level, because that's where the realities can really be obtained, because these people know where and how much it ought. And one way to really strengthen this trust building is by meaningfully engaging these farmers who feed, particularly in the context of Nigeria and Africa, who feeds the majority of the senior populations in Nigeria and also Africa as a whole. And so this speaks largely to where the need for local dialogue comes in, because we can't truly explore the opportunities and challenges available for just transition if we're not connected to these local communities, if we're not seeing the challenges from their perspectives, if we're not listening to them, and by listening to them, I'm not saying just having them in the room, but meaningfully engaging with them, because this would communicate a sense that their opinions and voices really matters, and that's because it's really those committing to feeding this population with without much support, without being heard. And this would definitely only keep affecting the formulation of policies and then the adoption of these policies, because if the policy formulated and intervention scheduled are not need-based, then definitely it won't deliver on set objectives. And that's why we are also engaged in this local dialogue, bringing together farmers and other stakeholders engaged in the food and farming space, to see how we can collaboratively explore the opportunities and the challenges available for this transition. And one thing that I wouldn't also forget to mention is the fact that governments at the local levels are also currently not positioned to deliver on some of these promises, because in terms of resources and then the technical competence, they are also not equipped to the scale needed to achieve this just transition. But then we believe that bringing together these farmers to view the problem and also explore the solutions from their own perspectives would really strengthen adoption and also build trust and partnerships and then lasting relationship between the farmers and the stakeholders. So we believe that to really achieve this, to really reposition agriculture to the front line of climate action, trust is largely essential, and that local dialogue can help with, because building and strengthening that forces at the local level and then feeding it into national commitments and intervention plans would really help you deliver on set objectives. Yeah, so that's it. Peace, back to you.
Luke, thank you very much. And we're going to dig into this issue of trust a little bit more later on too, because I think you've got some really valuable insights into that. But I think I like what you said, that we have to communicate the sense that people's opinions matter. And I think that's a very strong phrase, because I think sometimes even when we so-called consult people, we communicate quite loudly the sense that their opinions don't matter, and that we're just wasting their time. So I think that's a really good point. Next, we're going to come on to Joanne from the Samdana Institute in the Philippines. And Joanne's been, again, conducting local dialogues. Joanne, over to you.
Hello, everyone. Greetings to everyone in this session. So just as an introduction, Samdana Institute is a regional nonprofit organization where we're working in Southeast Asia. Since 2005, we have been working with indigenous peoples and local communities, supporting them in the recognition and assertion of their rights and for social justice. So indigenous peoples and many local communities in Southeast Asia are heavily dependent on natural resources, forage and forest foods, shifting agriculture, artisanal fishing and gathering. So such crops like tubers, sago, and root crops are staples. At the same time, these are the kinds of foods that they are able to set aside during lean times, when there are droughts and other emergencies. So this was especially demonstrated at the time, at the peak of the COVID-19 pandemic, when there were food shortages around. So we had 3 local dialogues, 2 in the Philippines and also 1 in Indonesia. These were participated in by indigenous communities and local organizations and other civil society groups. So in these dialogues, next please, we affirmed that indigenous communities and have intrinsic capacities to survive these climate-induced shocks and other stress events. So especially when they are in their territories where they are able to source their foods and natural medicine. And then, but these capacities have not been harnessed, or they are largely ignored. So like the nutritional values and healing properties found in these natural foods, which over time have also been replaced with commercially processed foods. And then the second highlight in the dialogue is that there is contrast between the practical experiences of Indigenous peoples and local communities with the current government and corporate policies and priorities. So a clear example of that is that in the Philippines, we have a national organic agriculture program, but it is not implemented consistently, and that aid or assistance to farmers are given more budget for distribution of chemical fertilizers rather than developing the organic agriculture. And then in the course of the pandemic, there were government plans for food estates, but in contrast, sustaining local food systems and bringing the food production at the local level was more viable as an alternative, and this was shown in the experiences by innovating entrepreneurs in Indonesia. So last slide, please. So these dialogues gave us opportunities to strengthen the collaboration that's going on with between and among Indigenous peoples and local communities themselves. So it was a good chance to exchange and to see that there's still this rich existing traditional food systems in their territories. Collaboration with government agencies, with the academe and other private sectors, including national donors, to promote not only the immediate discussion around these food systems, but also recognizing that there are really correlated basic issues like land tenure, protection of these natural ecosystems, and the access of Indigenous peoples and local communities to these food systems. So that's what I can share from us in our experience with the local dialogues. Thank you, Pete.
Thank you so much, Joanne. There is so much richness there. But certainly, I think the point you make about these capacities of local food system, Indigenous peoples to navigate through COVID, I think is something which certainly I don't think we've picked up very much on. You know, I think there's been some very old-fashioned ideas about, oh well, you know, people, you know, from the UK's perspective, people over there will find it really difficult to manage any of this stuff. And I think from your examples and other examples we've heard this week, you know, there's been this extraordinary resilience. You know, there's lots of chat about resilience, but when you actually hear about these practical examples on the ground, it's just it really makes us reflect on, well, how good is our food system compared to some of the food systems that are under threat in a sense, you know, and need to be properly recognised rather than simply sort of seen as, if you like, something which is old-fashioned, you know. So thank you so much for that. Now we're going to go on to hear from Carmen, who works with Colectivo Amasayo in Mexico, about the work she's been doing in Mexico, bringing farmers and non-farmers together. Carmen.
Hello, Pete. Hello, everybody. I am speaking on behalf of Colectivo Amasayo, which is a collective of women that work together with women producers. We work in different parts of Mexico, but we're going to talk about during the dialogue we did a project with in Mexico City. Mexico City is 59% of the city is rural, but the non-rural population does not know that. So one of the things we were willing to do was like making space in order to these two kind of rural and non-rural can speak together. So can I have the next slide, please? Okay, this is slide, the one which is to the left, where it says territorial listening narratives. This is our methodology, the way we interact with women. Also, we at some point choose the territory and start listening to the territory in a way that we can cook with women. So in these cooking sessions, we listen to narratives. So narratives of women that are very close to the land, and where we can find how the degradation of the territory is happening. In these narratives, we create some impact assessment through indicators that come from the narratives of the women. So after this listening to narratives and organizing the impact assessment, we generate a kind of action, a real action that where we can share what we have discovered together, women, producers, and Amasijo. And for this dialogue, we create a celebration which took form as a market. We organized a market in a contemporary art museum, in Mexico City, in a non-rural community, but very close to a rural community. So at some point, the people can come together in that space. In that space, we were able to reunite consumers, community from Milpalta, women producers, local government, and the state, non-local government, because the museum belongs to the state. And also, we reunite contemporary specialists in art. So during the 4 markets we organized, the producers were also having talks. So we have like four different themes. One thing was the Mexico City believes we live in a valley, but actually we have a watershed as a territory. So the first talk was about the watershed. The second talk was about art and food and local systems. The third talk was about territory and language, and the fourth talk was about communal governance. So the producers and the people who were talking in an art museum were the same. So we have people from the city interacting with this as a form of celebration. And you can see the market here, like how it comes. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Carmen. And it's fascinating, some of these conversations about the different ways you come to look at this issue and bringing in the really important dimensions about people and care. And we'll come back to that again. And finally, our last example is from Tokiana in Antananarivo, who works for who's the Milan Urban Food Policy Pact focal point for Antananarivo. So has experience of building a resilient food system there. Over to you.
Yeah, thank you very much, Pete, for the introduction. Hello, everyone, and welcome to this session. So basically, for Antananarivo, I'll just start with a brief introduction. So the capital city of Madagascar is basically with a population around 2.5 million for the agglomeration, where the city is surrounded by 65 municipalities over 100 kilometers. So basically 10% of the national population is located in the city, with 50% of that is the urban population. So 45% are cultivated lands.
You want the next slide? Great.
Apologies, seems he's having issues with the internet. So
okay.
We
give just a few seconds for that to come back, and if not, we'll go on to panel and then bring Tokiana back in and ask him again to give that sort of wider context. Just see if you can reconnect while he's in mid-flow. Okay, maybe we should give him some time and see if we can sort out technical issues from his side. it's best thing, Vivian, if we can bring the panel together then on screen, is that okay to just have some follow-up questions?
Yes, I think we can proceed to the panel.
Okay. So we wanted to just follow up with the speakers. We'd asked them just to introduce and to set the context a little bit for their work, and then to just follow up a bit on the next steps, if you like. And maybe we'll start back with Carmen where we left off, which is, and just ask Carmen to follow up a little bit more on, if you like, this work sounds really exciting and interesting and sort of depthful, but could you say at this stage, what impact has it had? What's happened as a result of these conversations that wouldn't have happened anyway? Carmen.
I guess there was a very important issue that was facilitated in the dialogue. The producers, the women producers, were speakers in a contemporary art museum. So they were not taking some exotic or folklore thing, but they were talking about a contemporary voice that needs to be heard. A contemporary voice that needs to be telling us the condition of our city. They were able to tell us, or to told us, that our city it's part of a water system and it's not a valley. They were able to tell us that most of the water that comes to the city comes from this part of the city, from where they live, and that because of the only green part of the city, they have like lot of everybody wants to take their land from them, so they need help from the city center to protect the land in order that the city would continue to have water. So I get this dialogue, what the impact of this dialogue was huge in terms of the city understandings, the kind of geological situation we have, the kind of interdependence we have, and how should we work together with them in protecting the land from the state, from different house building companies.
Carmen,
Carmen,
could you just come a little bit closer to the mic?
Yes.
Yeah, thanks.
Okay. So I don't know if you listened to that.
That was really helpful. So
I guess like the great contribution.
Yeah.
So yes, the great contribution was to figure out the interdependence between the rural and the non-rural in terms of water in the city, because people from the city center understood that we have to take care of the land that these women are taking care for centuries. So that was a lot. But also the outcomes, like very immediate outcomes, were that there's people from Milpalta, which are like 12 different towns, they were talking in the same space and they feel this power of being together and being heard. So after this market came, they auto-organize themselves to keep going in different spaces within the city to continue the market issue. More museums are willing to host markets from different rural parts of Mexico, and the consumers are willing to have the food from these markets. So I guess, and also the local government from Milpalta, which is the place, were like really eager to support this organization, this new organization that emerged from the dialogues, to keep helping them to go through the city, offering they cultivate in their towns. So it was like in a very down-to-earth situation that they are creating new markets, and in a very high-scale situation about understanding the interdependence we have between the rural and the non-rural. I guess that was like the outcomes.
That's great. Thank you very much, Carmen. It's fascinating, this thing about the product. These markets weren't about simply the product, but they were about the story behind the product, and quite subversive in the sense of bringing in all the things that lie behind the food into the conversation. I think quite often produce markets are just seen as places where people buy stuff, but that idea that you bring the issues into the room is very, very powerful. So thank you for that. Can we go on? Joanne, I know you've been doing dialogues in lots of different places in both Philippines and Indonesia. But this point you made about how does this connect with regional and national policy making? Have you got any more thoughts on that as to how the work you've been doing locally can actually integrate better with the policies that you say that need to be taken up at national level?
One of the things that came out during the dialogue was that there seems to be still an existing misunderstanding of indigenous agricultural practices when it comes to government agencies and how they define these activities. So the slash and burn farming or the shifting agriculture practice has been debated for a long time now. And there have been efforts to explain the nature of shifting cultivation and where it is rooted from traditionally. But still, I think it is still existing in government agencies that how the bureaucracy defines the activity is actually has a negative connotation on the people who practice shifting cultivation. So that's one example of that. And the other one is that again, I think it has something to do with the general economic policy or direction wherein the understanding or the view of agriculture is looked at an industrial scale. And so when there is talk about producing food, then what is more recognized is the large scale production that contributes to the economy, and we don't recognize the food that can be found just outside of the doorsteps of these people in the small islands or in the rural areas or in the mountains. And I think that is one of the things that is missing there and could still be further highlighted. And another thing is that for forests, there's also a very limited definition or limited understanding of what could be sourced from the forests. So non-timber forest products, and especially the wild foods that can still be found in these forests are also not, I think they are not given any economic value. And so that affects how governments also make these policies about forest management arrangements, and which, as in our experience, it has been a long, more than 25 years of seeing that these the limited view of forests actually degrading or causing local peoples to lose the natural ecosystems around when they convert these forest areas. I think that's for me for now, Pete. Thank you.
Thank you, Joanne. There are a lot of huge issues, and it's this sense, going back to what Iluzla was saying earlier about trying to communicate the sense that people are actually being listened to and their views matter. These differences of perspective about how to manage the forests, how to value local food, how to understand shifting cultivation. I mean, they're just fundamental sort of differences of views, and they're not going to be resolved unless people are in the same room together rather than talking at cross purposes. So thank you so much for that, Joanne. And Iluzla, I was wondering, you talked a lot about trust, and I know you worked with 7 different local authorities in the course of dialogues. I mean, can you give us any examples of how through those dialogues trust was built?
Yeah, thanks again, Pete. I think the initial challenge we had when we started out with the dialogue was getting to engage some farmers. Of course, we had established relationships with some farmers, but to ensure that the dialogue was as inclusive as possible, we needed to engage more farmers. And what happened when we initially met with some new farmers was them wanting to work with us. And of course, this was largely traceable to the fact that they have been engaged with in the past, which delivered on nothing, and then government have made promises to them, which was not delivered on. So their initial thought was to work with the government, but then we made them understand what the project was meant to achieve, what the dialogue was meant to achieve, and even in that time, they weren't also ready to listen to us. But what we did was we kept engaging with them, attending their meetings, sharing experiences with them, listening to them, and then sharing some success stories with them. And at the point, they started listening to us. They started wanting to engage with us, and it delivered some sense of engagement with them, such that if these people are able to be with us for these past weeks, for this past month, and then listening and helping us shape some of our actions and then giving their thoughts on it, then they were also free to engage with us when we called on them for the main dialogue. And what we did was, rather than just bringing together the farmers and the city representatives together as the start of the dialogue, we engaged with them individually at their community level, talking with them about the projects, and then listening to what challenges they've been facing, and then from our expertise also helping them to address some of these solutions, some of these problems. And that was how we're able to build trust with them. And then engaging with the government as well at the onset, that was also a challenge, especially when it's going to be difficult to access them. But what we did was to leverage on the networks we have to get in touch with this government. And when we did, we in some way made them understand that the policies and then the proposed interventions can only be translated to practices when the right audience have been engaged, when they are part of the formulation of these policies, and then when they are being heard. And somehow they also got interested, and that didn't happen at the first time we engaged with them, because they wouldn't, we couldn't even see them, but we kept going back and then wanting to see them. And at the point we got their attention, and sharing what because we met with the farmers first before going to the city representatives, and then sharing some of the outcome of our consultation and then engagement with the farmers with them, bring the interest of wanting to listen to them and also participating in the dialogue. And so those were basically what helped us to achieve engaging both the cities and then the farmers together when the time was right. Yeah, back to you, Pete. Thank you.
Great, thank you very much. This patience that you've had in eventually getting people to the table is really, really great, and we can't rush these things. Hasib, I wanted to just hear from you, and then we're going to go back to Tokiana to do the presentation and the panel, which would be great. So Hasib, you were a bit gloomy when you talked earlier on about the NDCs. Did you find anything where you could say more of that would be good?
Yeah, thank you very much, Pete, and I apologize for the connection dropout. So basically, the city of Antananarivo are focusing more right now on the food system resilience and sustainability based on multiple actions, like, for example, the city region food system with the FAO. And also we are trying to implement more food system strategy based on the Milan Urban Food Policy Pact, because right now Antananarivo is part of a steering committee of that global organization. So through that, we are trying to integrate the Milan Urban Food Policy Pact activities in order to have more multi-sectorial engagement, like, for example, with the NGO, with producer, and especially also with all the people who are working on the food system in the city of Antananarivo. And through that, we try to organize the local dialogue with ICLI Africa in order to reassemble all of the multi-stakeholders to have common visions for the food system in the city for the upcoming years. So through this vision, we are trying to coordinate all of the activities and actions in order to have more tangible actions and result for the population. But at the same time, the city is also focusing on more resilient strategy, like for example, the implementation of, as I said, the city region food system, which is a strategy to implement more resilient actions in order to fight the climate shocks and stresses that we are facing right now. So that's it right now. Thank you, Pete, for letting me.
That's really helpful, Takan. And maybe I could follow that up with, I mean, it's great having this multi-stakeholder dialogue and trying to get a collective vision. And I'm just wondering if you could share your experience in terms of with the pandemic, but also this, and in that context, how you think this dialogue, this involving all the stakeholders, will make your food system in the city region more resilient. Have you got some ideas about how that could happen practically over the next few years?
Yes, thank you very much. So basically, as I said, the multi-stakeholders platform is kind of a concrete tool that envisions multi-institutional collaboration between different levels, like the government, like the local one, the region, and the national government. So all of the actors in that level are working together, but also including the civil societies and NGO, and these partners of the municipality are the one who help us to have more resources to implement resilience strategies and actions. Like, for example, right now we are having partners that are focusing on the implementation of like community gardens and school gardens in order for this vulnerable population to be more resilient by having another source of income, but also another source of food for example, during the pandemic, these people were able to have self-consumption food based on the community gardens. So these are kind of actions that the municipality are focusing right now based on the multi-stakeholders engagement. So thank you.
That sounds great. Thank you very much. People will notice we're running slightly behind the schedule. We're going to go into breakout rooms in about 3 minutes time. But meanwhile, I just wanted to bring Hasib back in, who started us off talking about the NDCs. And I'm just wondering, Hasib, if there was anything from your research so far from any country where you could say, we need more of that.
Thanks, Pete, and thanks to all the panelists. Very interesting discussions today, and learning a lot more about local dialogues and how that could feed into the nationally determined contributions and other national policies for food system transformation. As I mentioned in my presentation, generally the NDCs that we assessed, or the 8 NDCs to be precise that we assessed, most of them did not really include a lot of information on how the targets were developed, how the measures were developed, and whether the process was inclusive or not, whether key stakeholders across different parts of the food systems were included in that process. One NDC, though, that stands out is that is of Colombia. Colombia's NDC provides a lot more details on how the measures, the targets were developed by the government, who were engaged in terms of actors across different sectors, and what types of consultation mechanisms and formats were in place in engaging different stakeholders. So that's really helpful on its own. But we also talked to a wide group of stakeholders in Colombia, including the indigenous representatives of indigenous peoples, and found out that indeed the process of developing the NDC in Colombia was quite inclusive in comparison to the rest of countries that we looked into. They had a public consultation in place, they had a survey conducted, they had communication strategies in place where they communicated different parts of the measures and NDC components with the wider population. They had dialogues with grassroots communities, and they also engaged with private sector actors, including food supply chain companies. And this is reflected not only in the process itself, as mentioned in the NDC, but also in the content of the NDC in terms of the targets and the measures included in relation to climate change mitigation and adaptation, as well as in relation to food system. For example, the NDC lists 32 sectoral mitigation targets, and that were quantified and included into Colombia's economy-wide emission reduction goal. And these were developed based on these stakeholder consultations, taking into account the different perspectives. In addition, the NDC also lists 89 mitigation measures across different sectors. These were put forward by various departments within the government at the national level, at the city level, and at the local level. And 24 mitigation measures were led by the private sector actors, including, as I mentioned, food retailers and food and beverage manufacturers. At the national level, the process of developing NDC itself was also quite well coordinated, in a sense that while it was led by one ministry, the Ministry of Environment and Sustainable Development, it included various other ministries and departments across the government. And this is the kind of process that we would like to see in developing and implementing NDCs across the world. However, I'm sure there are a lot of more things that the government of Colombia could do in order to make the NDCs compatible with food system transformation and compatible with inclusive governance, and to ensure a just transition to more climate resilient and sustainable food systems.
Listen, that's great, Hasib. And yeah, I think a lot of us would wish that that sort of approach, getting ministers together at national level as well as engaging people at different levels of governance, if that would become the norm, that would be real progress, I think, in these things. So thank you so much. Okay, we're going to go into our breakout rooms. I think the facilitators know what we're going to be talking about, which is good, but basically we're asking people to share the experience of food system governance where they live, how similar or different it is to what we've heard, but also any inspiration you've had from the talk so far. You know, what do you think you could take from that to change where you live or where you work? So see you in the breakout rooms.
All right, guys, I'm assigning you to breakout rooms. I just need 30 seconds so we have all the rooms set correctly.
And we'll leave the 25 minutes or so.
Right, which should be right.
Mateus just confirming that I should be going to room 1.
You can choose, because since your group is not, it was not created, you let me know, I can move you, or you can go by yourself to anyone.
Okay, sure, just
Same
confirming.
Right.
Thanks, Mateus.
All right, I think everyone is there. Rule number 3 is smaller. Maybe you can join that one, Isabel. And Tokiana, same for you, since we're thinking that we'll go for rule number 3. I can actually just move you there if you don't mind.
He's there, he just hasn't joined. Turkiana, please,
All right.
can you join room 3? Can you accept the breakout room?
I guess the same for Irving, which is now here in the room. Vivian, should we stick to 25 minutes?
Yeah.
Yeah, because that would be, let's say, 20 past the hour, correct?
Yes. I'm wondering if we should actually merge and have just 2 rooms. Well, we already have 3, but I was thinking it might be more, have a richer conversation if we have 3. But
Yeah, but I think we're fine. We have approximately 6 per room effectively joined. Yeah.
Now.
Yeah.
Please, can you join one of the rooms?
I don't hear, sorry.
So we have someone else in the room, Erwin.
Erwin, yeah, but he didn't accept the room. Maybe he's not online right now. The other ones which not accepted are obviously the translators, right?
Yes.
Everyone else is assigned. Okay, I have an eye on the clock. Yeah, so if we stick to the plan, that would be 20 past the hour. So 5 minutes before 15 past the hour, I will send a broadcast that we only have 5 minutes, okay? I'll be here.
Great. Welcome back, everybody. It was, even with these small groups, you only really start to just dip into these issues and then it's time to go. So I'm sorry about that. But now we're back together again. I think it'd be interesting just to open this conversation up to a plenary to get some, just a couple of really quick points from the three facilitators would be helpful, but just to then bring everybody into a final conversation. So I'm not sure at the end of the day who ended up facilitating the three groups up to reshuffle, but I know that Carmen was facilitating ours. So Carmen, do you just give a couple of points from what we were talking about?
I think that was me rather than Carmen, but
oh, sorry, two Carmen. Sorry, my fault.
Oh, sorry. Yeah, I'll shut up.
Carmen, do you want to go first? Carmen Zuleta Ferrari, do you want to go first?
Yes. Thank you very much, Pete. Thank you. So we have discussed a lot in our group. So I first started mentioning some of the experience we had in Antananarivo, where we had the city got engaged little by little, and they decided to take the lead, knowing that there were only the ones who had this power and capacity. I mean, the city knew that the city had the power and capacity to lead this process of the governance and the multi-stakeholder engagement. So this was crucial. So the role of the city, where initiatives are really not efficient independently, but together can make really the difference, this role of the cities is crucial. Then we had other interventions where we discussed about, for example, in Scotland, about the discussion was about farmers who are and producers who are feeling really in the margin. I mean, they are not feeling included in this dialogue and in the food system governance. So they are quite worried because now there is a critical situation happening with the Brexit and all that. So they want to be included, and their worries want to be included, but because they don't know what's going to happen to their farming. So we spoke a little bit about this crisis element, where it might be the opportunity to get together and find solutions together. So this connotation of crisis as an opportunity to trigger the dialogue and to trigger the thinking about solutions and common visions for the future. Then we had some discussions about the linkages between rural and urban areas. The fact that there were sometimes this lack of continuity between urban and rural areas is not happening because there's not a background for that. Otherwise, the structure, the institutional structure for that, there are no regulations that are supporting these linkages. There are no plans for territorial development. So all this fluidity, continuity that we need between the urban and rural areas needs to have a support, and this support needs to be provided by the governance process, especially the plans, the policies, and the regulations existing at the different levels. There were some comments as well about the role of this local governance and governments. So this relationship between national governments and local governments. So why local governments are not being supported or being supported. So this vertical integration that somehow doesn't happen, this understanding that this food system is composed by different actors and that they have to be brought together for the discussion, relying on the role that each of us, are the role of each actor in the system. So this connection should be really reinforced locally, and the national governments have to support this discussion. And then there were some comments about the awareness for the consumption, for the bottom line of the value chain, to raise the awareness of consumers so that the producers really respond to their needs. The fact that some cities, for example, some territories are mostly consuming exported and imported food, and this food is not what producers are producing. So there is an interest to really reinforce this consumption, responsible consumption, sustainable consumption, and raising the awareness and supporting programs that really raise this awareness so that the market is really consolidated for producers to continue to exist. So these are one of the, I tried to make a fast resume of what we discussed in our group. Thank you very much.
That was really helpful, Carmen. And for anybody watching this back, that would be a really useful summary. Thank you so much. Mies, I'll bring you in.
Yeah, sorry, I spoke before my turn earlier. Some of the things you talk about, Carmen, really resonated in what we talked about as well. But we had an input first from Richard about what's happening at the UN Food System Summit that was earlier, and the comment that unless we actually, that was of course a really contested space and boycotted by many, and the conclusion was very much that unless you focus on the agro corporates who put up all the barriers to discussing things in government and set targets and to be met properly, there isn't the other people see little point of taking part in that dialogue. We heard from Cape Town and the grassroots needing for government to develop markets, to lead with procurement, to connect local agricultural producers with their consumers and that kind of thing, which sounded really familiar to what's needed to be done in Scotland. And that was felt to be, unless there is concrete actions that's being addressed by government, the tone of the dialogue is very difficult. So in Scotland, for example, there's a sense from producers who are at the bottom of the chain and feel very much on the margins that they're being blamed for all the problems, and yet they're not given an active voice. So that's very counterproductive. It leads to mental health problems and disengagement rather than engagement. And then by contrast, the Mexican women that Carmen talked about are very angry and have a very strong message to give about what exactly is going to be done and demanding for concrete actions. So the tone of this dialogue is very important as well and has real consequences. The other point we discussed was the need for bringing back diversity and the reliance on what they gained from the panelists' inputs. The undermining of diverse produce and indigenous produce and so on, for example, that's being seen everywhere. That, for example, we talked about in Philippines, the rice becoming replaced by engineered varieties just grown for profit and so on. So those are really storm issues that need to be addressed as well.
Thanks.
Much homogeneity in what people are seeing, and therefore hope that if we recognize the issues and can maybe find more global solutions.
Thank you very much, Mies. That's really helpful. And who is feeding back from the third group?
It's going to be Samara.
Hi, everybody. Can you hear me?
Sure.
Great. Okay. I'm going to have to minimize you to go back to my document. Okay, so we had a very interesting conversation. So, the point being that we had people from Mexico, people from Kenya, people from the Philippines, and everybody very much felt that consultations were not reflective enough. They were not inclusive enough. So that was a common theme that came up amongst everybody in the group. And then we started trying to think through some solutions because people in the group have also been involved in carrying out various consultations with people, and apologies for the construction noise in the background. And so things that we thought about in terms of how to do that were to make sure that consultations are held in a neutral place, and also the importance of having narratives that link us back to the territories that we're in, so that we're having a very place-based conversation, because that helps to sort of get people out of their mindsets and their divisions, and also to really be focused on coming to the table talking about something we're all caring about, that being food and sort of the narratives that food helps to create in terms of connection to place, connection to each other, connection to culture, connection to history. And then also the importance about the narrative that the people who are feeding the world are small farmers, and that we don't have to depend on huge monocultures, and therefore we have to involve these people in our processes as a way to overcome the sort of barrier that it has to be the regular large-scale actors who are engaged in these dialogues. And finally, the idea around consumers not being passive, but having a real responsibility to take care of food systems, to take care of the land, and become more engaged. And I mean, it was such a rich conversation. There's a lot more to say, but those are some of the highlights.
Pete, you're on mute.
That food, food itself, its materiality, creates this connection that we can start from, that we may have different views about things, but actually if we have place-based dialogues, then at least we're all talking about the same place, because and the food can very much underline that sense of where are we now in this. And I don't know about you, but I've heard a lot of very high-level global dialogues this last few days, where people generally start off saying, we need to do this and we need to do that. And it's always hard to know, well, who is the we that's going to do all this? Because actually somewhere else in the world, there are people, and usually women, who are actually getting up in the morning and producing food. So for their family, for their community, for their country. So I think this sort of idea that, actually place-based dialogues that start with the food, start with the territory, and work up from there are really, really an alternative to some of this sort of very, very top-down narrative. I've got maybe 2 minutes for anybody else who'd like to make an intervention. So there's some people who haven't spoken in the plenary session. Does anybody like to come in? Tatiana, I don't know if you're still with us, if there's any more you wanted to add. Okay, I've got Ivan. What's coming? Ivan.
Hi. One of the things that really strikes me across all the conversations that we heard this morning is how difficult it is to get these conversations going. So we all feel that these dialogues are important for a variety of reasons, but we all feel that they are very difficult to conduct. And a point that came out very strongly in our group was the one about, who convenes and who structures this dialogue, and the importance of having perhaps local government to structure or to provide and to convene those dialogues. We thought was very powerful. I have a strong feel that this is the beginning of a journey, and that this journey has a long way to go still. But that it's great to know that that journey has started.
Thanks, Ivan. And just as I can finish with just a couple of reflections on this, we've had, this huge global shock with the pandemic. We're here in Glasgow because of the climate and nature emergencies that are coming down the track at us. And we know, we've said too many times, food's essential to this. We can't get to Paris unless we tackle some of the food system issues. And it's really complicated. And what we've heard from Hasib is that, at least in one country, you can do food system governance properly. You can actually make a difference, work at different levels, and work across silos. And I think that's an important thing to take away. Another big issue at these talks is that 5 years is too long to come back to discuss how we're doing with our climate targets. And I think similarly with some of the food plans that we've been talking about creating either city or national level, 5 years is too long, and we have to have quite a dynamic process of keeping on interrogating these and looking at them and looking at whether we're making progress or not. I think if the dialogue, the governance isn't simply about producing a plan, submitting it, and then saying, here you go. And I think if the NDCs are going to be revised more frequently, that will put more energy possibly into this local food system governance. We've heard again that farmers matter and that cities matter. And I just wanted to finish by saying, I don't know about you, but I've been hearing a lot of chat during COP26 about COP27. I don't know what it is. People are so they enjoy the meeting so much they can't wait to have another one. But and a lot of talk about how that's going to be the food COP. And I suppose what I think we need to take, what I take from these conversations, is that if people are talking about food systems more at COP27, that it's going to be hugely important that the process through which people prepare for that, and also the conversations that people have next time around, are very much involving cities, local governments, and farmers, and not simply bringing member states together. Because I think we'll end up, with the same sort of haggling over the old model, of consolidated supply chains, global supply chains, squeezing out local production, unless there's a very strong voice to be made for local governance of food systems. I think we could end up regretting that we have more talk about food at COP27. So I'd like to thank everybody for coming, taking part in this. There's so much more to explore here, and obviously for IAD to organising the Development and Climate Days. And and have a good COP, people who are here, and everybody else, thanks for joining, and see you soon. Bye-bye.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks. Bye.
Yeah, bye.
Gracias. Bye.